Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Security Solutions TV. Cybersecurity is now a firm business issue, not just a technical one. As organisations face rising AI-driven threats, growing regulatory pressure, and the need for stronger operational resilience, identity and access security has become the centre risk management and business continuity plan for a lot of companies. In this interview, we explore how these pressures are reshaping security priorities for Australian organisations and what leaders should be doing now to stay ahead. Joining us is Karim Toubba, Chief Executive Officer of LastPass. Karim joined LastPass in 2022 and brings more than 25 years of cybersecurity leadership and experience. Before LastPass, he served as the CEO of Kenna Security, the risk-based vulnerability management company acquired by Cisco, where he later oversaw the Kenna integration along with Cisco's EDR and XDR portfolio. Karim, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, John.
So let's just jump straight into it because I know you're short on time. Why has cybersecurity become a business issue for senior leadership and boards rather than just something for IT departments to handle?
It's actually a telling and great question. The reason it's become so critical to boards, is really two primary reasons. Number one, security becomes an enabler and needs to become even more of an enabler to allow companies to move faster, especially in the world of SaaS applications and AI. Boards are putting a lot of pressure on IT security organizations to adopt new technologies. So security needs to keep up and really allow the secure adoption of these technologies to drive productivity and drive, ultimate top line for companies. So in the old world, it used to be the department of no, I can't do this because of security and risk. Today, organizations of all sizes are getting a tremendous amount of pressure to actually have security unlock capabilities for the business, but do so securely at scale.
Yeah. And so I guess that leads us to the next point, which is how ready, in your opinion, are Australian organisations for the growing use of AI in cyber attacks and the risks created when staff use AI tools without approval? Because we have seen a multitude of examples of this across the board.
Well, listen, I would love to say this is a uniquely Australian problem, but it's not. It's a global one. We see it in the US. We see it in Europe. We're a global organization with over 100,000 business customers. And the truth is everybody has two inordinate amount of pressures that are being thrust on them currently. The first one is the one that you mentioned, which is how do I move fast and start to use AI to fulfill the promise of productivity and growth within the business and take the things that everybody's doing on a day-to-day basis that's mundane so that I can streamline it. And two, how do I do that securely? And so I would say I don't think Australia is any different. I've spent this week with customers. I don't think they're any different than the customers that we see in the US or the customers that we see in Europe. They are all attempting to quickly understand and assess a number of fundamental things. First and foremost, what applications are my employees currently using that are AI based? Believe it or not, that's actually true across the board. Because a lot of the initial thrust of AI came through the web. So people were able to access AI-based services through the web. And then secondly, what's my overall overarching strategy from an AI perspective? And in order to understand that, it really is rooted in visibility and control. So how do I see what AI capabilities and applications people are using? And then how do I control them to ensure that they're aligning with what we have? I would say most organizations today are really quickly scrambling is probably the best way to say it, to try to understand both what the policy and is internally, but also what technologies and tools to deploy to give them that level of visibility. And there's a mad dash to be able to accelerate both simultaneously.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, I guess one of the things a lot of commentators have alluded to and are concerned about is, are we going to see ourselves in an AI-powered arms race as far as cybersecurity is concerned? Because We saw Anthropic coming out with a new model last week that they felt was so powerful it just could not be released to the public. And again, that model was built specifically around finding and detecting vulnerabilities in software, which again is a two-edged sword because it can also be used to break software. So, I mean, is that something that LastPass is prepared for, and how are you dealing with that sort of level of technology moving forward?
So, I mean, for your listeners, yeah, I mean, it's a great question. The model that you're referring to is the Mythos model, which is Anthropic's latest one that they have not released. They actually brought in 40 vendors from the cyber community to really sort of give them a head start, if you will, on detection of those vulnerabilities. And you know, some of the early tests that they've done with those models have revealed some staggering vulnerabilities that the vendors have found sort of generically across the industry. Um, I think that it's incumbent on every vendor to kind of step back, take notice, and understand what's about to be upon all of us, which is the ability for both the software development and vendor community simultaneously as the attacker community to compress and accelerate how quickly vulnerabilities are detected, found, but potentially also remediated. So it is, as you described, absolutely an arms race. Um, Interestingly, we leverage AI within our and also our security organization. And we've already built pipelines with Opus, which is the precursor model to Mythos 4.6 to be specific. And those pipelines effectively are used with Anthropic to detect current vulnerabilities. So we've already kind of built the infrastructure, so to speak. And when Mythos is released to the broader public, we'll be able to take advantage of that very, very quickly because we built the underlying infrastructure to test with it. That's kind of been the approach that we've used, and you know, hopefully the approach that many other vendors have used, because the time to deploy it will need to be very, very, very shortened to ensure that you're leveraging the capabilities quicker than adversaries.
So I want to pivot slightly away from the AI side of things, more to, I mean, it's still in the same vein, but more to the identity verification side of things. We're seeing that Australia is bringing more and more industries under tougher anti-money laundering rules. What will that mean at a very surface level for the way organisations verify identities and control access to systems and data?
Look, I mean, generally speaking, I think what this is telling us in Australia specifically is that there'll be a pretty significant push in identity and access management in a much more regulated and risk-based direction. Historically, the identity and access market, as it relates to regulation, at times has been kind of just the oversight of just logging in and provisioning. I think you'll see much more formal AML controls that are implemented as part of some of the requirements mandates for anti-money laundering and the ability to actually do it down market. Of course, as you know, some of the anti-money laundering mandates started at larger organizations. The latest ones are kind of pushing it down to smaller organizations as well. So, if you will, there's not an organization that is not going to have to comply in one way, shape, or form, and they'll be much more prescriptive in nature.
So LastPass talks about secure access essentials. How is that different from a traditional password or traditional password management? Because there's a second part to this, but we'll cover this first.
So, look, I mean, the heritage of what we did historically was all around password management. And if you sort of step back and look at it, it was how do I enable the control, the creation, control, security, and management of credentials that organizations and users within organizations are using to authenticate to particular applications. And password managers as a whole, this is not unique to LastPass, really started as a way to augment single sign-on and identity providers because the core applications, email, SharePoint, if you're a Microsoft shop, specific productivity applications typically fall in line with single sign-ons. So the visibility and control of the authentication is pretty well served. Password managers serve to sit on top of that because there's an entire layer of applications that are typically not part of single sign-on frameworks, partly because of the costs associated, and partly because some of them can't technically integrate. And so what we realized a couple of years ago is that we were kind of only delivering value to our customers in security for half the equation of what we believe is essential for secure access, which is the authentication layer, which is the core password management. Since then, we've sort of extended the definition of secure access essentials to include visibility and control. So now, with the same deployment of software, no additional software needed, I can now tell you what applications your users are using, put policies in place to allow, warn, or restrict access to the application, and manage the authentication flow in terms of the credentials that are used to log in. And I can do that by user, by app across the entire stream, which means that I can tie an application to the authentication method and tie that to policy as well. So that's our kind of more broader holistic definition as we've expanded significantly outside of password management in terms of the broader definition of secure access essentials.
Yeah, well, still on that, I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about how you do manage access and authentication, because we're seeing that there's a big push amongst a lot of vendors and manufacturers now towards the use of biometrics and passkeys. So
Yep.
in that context, does that sort of future make passwords redundant? And if so, how is LastPass managing that?
I mean, in theory, eventually, yes, but like many transitions, John, in the industry, this will take time to happen. And so our particular perspective, by the way, that perspective is less of an opinion, more rooted in fact, based on what we see. We see a hybrid world where vaults like our password manager will store traditional credentials like usernames and passwords, API keys, tokens, but also passkeys simultaneously. So well over a year ago, we launched support for passkeys. And if you are a user logging into a site, the site supports passkeys. We can help generate, we interact with the application that supports it, help generate the passkeys, store them in the vault. And conversely, if you're using a site that doesn't yet support passkeys and you want to use a traditional username and password, you can certainly store it in the vault. And the beauty of the model from both a security and a convenience perspective for the user is that the user is no worse for the wear. They actually don't know whether we're passing a username and password or a passkey to authenticate. All they need to do is understand how to get into their vault, either with a master password or a biometric.
So many mid-sized organizations find cybersecurity too complex and difficult to manage. How do you help reduce that complexity? And I know you've just covered it a little bit, but when we're talking about on an enterprise-wide scale.
It's a terrific question, partly because this is such a relevant topic as security becomes much more complex. I mean, the security industry is an interesting one. I've been in it for the better part of 3 decades, and it continues to be a layered approach, meaning that you have a variety of technologies that are deployed in the cloud, within applications, on systems, in the network, and on endpoints. And oftentimes there are overlapping technologies that are deployed to kind of give you a much more comprehensive view to really be able to drive security efficacy across the organization. While that drives efficacy on one end of the spectrum, it creates complexity on the other. And so, look, for large organizations that are well funded and well resourced, they can manage that complexity. But as you start to go down market, in the mid market, in SMB, and candidly, even enterprises that don't have a huge security budget, of which there are quite a few, it becomes much more tenuous because they want that efficiency, but they can ill afford the complexity because complexity means that they have to have a lot of specialists that are certified on the variety of technologies and platforms. And so we've kind of had this deeply held view for some time, that the more you can integrate different elements of security technologies and streamline the visibility and actions that organizations can take, the more you're reducing complexity, but also driving the efficacy factor up. So a lot of it is rooted for what we do specifically. As I said earlier, we started in the authentication space with a password manager. But again, it's only half the equation. What you really want to understand risk of users accessing an application is the entire flow, which includes visibility into the application, whether the application is part of an application construct that you should allow a user to access within your organization and what the associated policy is, and then specific capabilities to understand the type of authentication requirements that are required to access the application itself. Stitching all of that data together very seamlessly for an administrator, both IT and security, in a single platform removes the need to deploy multiple technologies and then have a backend system that aggregates the data and allows you to really kind of streamline the entire access and policy world.
You've alluded a number of times to the fact that LastPass started as largely a password manager and has evolved since then. How has the LastPass platform changed in recent years, especially as organizations have had to rethink their internal security?
So look, I mean, there's been a lot of work that we've done across multiple dimensions, and I would say the three areas the platform has evolved is around security. It's evolved significantly around feature capability, the type of capabilities that we offer to our customers. And we've radically evolved elements of usability because the experience actually matters. And it's not just the experience for the administrator, it's also the experience for the end user because we're one of the sort of, maybe 5 to 10% of the technology stack that's front and center to the end user, John, right? I mean, historically, most security technologies are embedded in the cloud, in the network, deep on a device in a sys tray running that the user doesn't interact with it. As you know, password management, sharing passwords, things like that, those are front and center to the user. So we've made a lot of changes to the user experience to really further drive adoption and streamline and reduce the friction.
We've spoken a bit about the way LastPass has evolved as an organization over the last few years, but in your view, how is the way that organizations manage identity and access changing in 2026 and beyond? Because with the advent of AI and all sorts of new technologies coming on board, things are changing faster than we have ever seen historically. And I'm interested to know where you think it's going.
Yeah, that's another terrific question. We spend quite a bit of time with customers talking about the evolution of their security program as a whole, but identity specifically. So I would say right now, the biggest recognition from an identity perspective is, especially as it relates to the future, is moving and understanding how organizations are going to scale for managing identities of users to ultimately identities of agents, right? So it is purported based on early data that for there's going to be an average of somewhere around 90 to maybe 100 agents for every user ultimately when agentic really kind of takes hold. And if you think about it from a business perspective, that makes a ton of sense, right? Agents work 24 hours a day. You can spawn multiples of them, characteristics that humans don't have, right? So it becomes a very, very different world where organizations have to start thinking about agentic authentication. And that means that they have to have the capability to understand the relationship between a user launching an agent and whether or not you actually delegate the authority of the user authorization construct to the agent. They have to also understand when agents launch other agents, how do you delegate the authority and the authorization construct to the downstream agents or broader agent swarms. So these are just some of the things that organizations are really having to think about in advance of really being able to lean into some of the things that they can do and realize from an agentic perspective.
Yeah, well, I don't think anyone's really truly got well, I mean, a few individuals and but I think the average user doesn't really have a true grasp of the depth and breadth of what's coming down the pipe. So, in your view, over the next 12 to 24 months, what should Australian organisations focus on most when it comes to identity and access security?
I would say a couple of things. That's first of all, get the core basics right at scale. Extremely important, right? It's hard to build. There's always a temptation to think about the future, right? Which makes a lot of sense. But oftentimes, what we see within organizations is that uh, the current the current construct is kind of like the foundational baseline. And if you don't have the foundation really solid at scale, it's hard to build for the future. So I would say first, understand what your identity and access policy construct is, and how you build upon that. And that includes, as I mentioned earlier, really having a very clear capability and of having full visibility into all your applications that people are using. Does not matter if they're SSO based apps or traditional apps, SaaS apps, or AI apps. So you can get a full inventory and how users are authenticating into them and what the policy is around that. That's kind of first and foremost. And then secondly, I think organizations, particularly ones that are going to lean in heavily over the next 12 to 24 months into AI and are going to unlock the potential and the promise of AI and agentic, really need to start making foundational investments into how to think about agentic authentication as a whole.
Now, as we mentioned at the top of the interview, you've had a fairly wide breadth of experience with over 25 years experience in the cybersecurity space, and you've led some of the biggest organizations and worked with some of the biggest organizations around this. So I want to close by asking, you know, what is the one cybersecurity related issue that keeps you awake at night? And how do we as end users need to be thinking about it moving forward?
It's a good question. I think the thing that keeps me awake at night more than anything else is the moment in time we're in, around AI. And I know everybody's talking about the promise of AI, but there are a number of us who are thinking very, very deeply about enabling that promise in a secure way. And I think the interesting thing that people don't recognize is if you look at the attack surface today and you look at how attacks typically manifest themselves, you've got organizations that have broad-based infrastructures from cloud to endpoint to networks to applications. And then they have a series of technologies, as we talked about earlier, the layers of security that are built to protect the organization and the employee and the data within the organization. Why? Because attackers are looking to poke holes, right? Remember, the old rule is always is an attacker only has to be right once, right? The defender has to be right 100% of the time. Once they find a hole, they get in, and then what they do is they exfiltrate the data. They may exfiltrate a username and password, maybe sensitive data to the organization. The way I think about AI is it's inverted, right? The biggest risk of AI is actually us pushing data into the LLMs, right? You've seen some early examples of organizations and individuals that have inadvertently pushed information. So it's kind of a very new model. It's kind of akin to DLP, but kind of much more pervasive in nature, because you are enabling a new set of tools at an extremely aggressive rate to the broader organization. And I think really understanding how to secure AI holistically for an organization is the thing we have a lot of focus on, as do other vendors within the community as a whole.
Look, Karim, you've given us a lot to think about. If people want to know more about LastPass, where do they go? How do they find you?
Yeah, lastpass.com. We've got a plethora of resources on the website, including blog information that allows us to share a lot of different perspectives around what we're seeing within the industry as a whole.
Well, look, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure chatting. And ladies and gentlemen, until we chat again next time, stay safe, and we hope to see you again on Security Solutions TV.